Oh, don't worry about it. We are live. This is Justin and Donald Save America. We're talking about a new upcoming book that both of us worked on. Justin co-author, but hey, I'm just a lowly contributor. But Justin, how long ago was it? This is a sequel to our latest book that we worked on with Glenn
Yep.
Beck, the Great Reset, right here. Joe Biden and the
Yep.
Rise of 21st Century Fascism. When did this book come out?
That was January 2022.
2022. So what, like a year and a half ago this came out?
Year and a
So
half.
what we've got for you folks is the next book. So here it is. Dark Future, uncovering the Great Reset's terrifying next phase. So the first book here, the Great Reset book, when we've told this story a million times. I'm just going to do the elevator pitch of it. Justin, you called me up on the phone. You said, you hearing about this Great Reset stuff? This was back in like 2020, right? Early COVID days. I said, no, you started listing off all these different quotes of these people talking about the Great Reset and, everyone from Prince Charles, now king, all the way to Klaus Schwab and some Greenpeace people, and just a whole host. Al Gore, I think, was in there as well, all talking about the Great Reset and all using the same terminology and stakeholder capitalism, all this different stuff. So we looked into it. We said, holy cow, this is their plan of controlling the economy and society by extension. It's called the Great Reset, it's ESG, it's all of these different things. So we need to sound the alarm on this. Glenn Beck, the author of this, like I said, Justin, you were the co-author. He saw this as the most important thing in the world. We ran with it. It was a huge success. All of this different stuff, tons of mobilization of lawmakers and listeners and fans and followers of us and Glenn Beck as well saw this rally to the cause to try to push back against this Great Reset. So then that brings us to the sequel. So you and to an extent me as well, you can't just let success be, stand on its own. You had to keep digging. And when you kept digging, we started finding even scarier stuff below the surface. If the Great Reset wasn't scary enough, the stuff that is in this upcoming book is unbelievable. But I think the good starting point is to talk about the Great Narrative, which was almost going to be the title of this book, almost a play on the Great Reset, Great Narrative, which is another term that was coined by the Klaus Schwabs, the World Economic Forums of the world. So why don't you just start off by talking about the idea of the Great Narrative?
Yeah. Well, the Great Narrative actually is the way that we really first started thinking about this as a potential topic for the book. At least for me, that was kind of the beginning of me thinking about this as a topic for another book. I remember actually I was about to go on. This is true. This is how, I don't know if I've told you this, but I probably did at the time, but I'm sure forgot.
I do have a terrible memory. Go ahead.
I was about to go on the radio with Glenn Beck. I was in my car in a parking lot in North Carolina, and I was about to go on the radio, and I get some kind of notice from one of the producers saying, hey, Glenn wants to talk about this Great Narrative thing. So could you talk about that? Now, this is common. This kind of last minute stuff sometimes comes up. I, of course, really had no idea what the Great Narrative is. So I am frantically looking up Great Narrative and trying to figure out at the last second, what is this thing? And I start looking into it, and I'm reading like some of the stuff that they're putting on this. It was an event that was going on roughly at that time called the Great Narrative, and it was being hosted in the Middle East. And I was reading some of the stuff that came out of it, and there was some weird quotes and stuff, and it was talking about technology, and I don't know. And I'm just thinking, this is weird. So we go into the interview. It comes up very briefly. I mention, I just kind of am very briefly talking about just the basics of kind of what I had quickly read. And then that was kind of it. That ended. And maybe a week or two later, I reach out to you and some of the others at the Heartland Institute, I want to say that Jack and Chris were also probably involved early on in that, or certainly, I think Chris. I don't think Jack would have been involved in that. But basically, I wanted to see. I was started watching the videos of this conference where they had this great narrative and event, and some of the quotes and some of the stuff that they were saying in this about technology and the role of technology for the future, and was just incredible. I mean, they said things like they wanted to create a new blueprint for society, a new blueprint for humanity. They wanted to they talked about all of these things related to designing the future and creating
the
go ahead.
second wave of human evolution, I think, also came.
The second wave of human evolution. And all of this was talking about how interconnected we were all becoming and how technology was going to change the future and how we needed a new great narrative to help usher in this emerging era of the fourth industrial revolution and new technology and how it has to be designed so for inclusivity and equity and all the ESG stakeholder language we hear all the time from the Great Reset stuff, but with technology as the theme. And the more we started kind of looking at those videos and looking at the other stuff that was said in these interviews between Klaus Schwab and this guy named Al Gargawi, who is an official in the United Arab Emirates where this whole thing was being held and is really futurism focused. And the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, is very futurism focused in general. And so just the more we started looking at this conference, which was not a gigantic conference, really, by World Economic Forum standards, and seeing the kinds of things they were saying there and the other things that they were talking about related to this great narrative, the more it became obvious that technology and futurism and rebuilding and redesigning new systems, not just technological systems, but new systems for property ownership, new systems for all kinds of other things, was being openly discussed in the same way that the Great Reset was being openly discussed by the very same people. And they were all using this great narrative, new technology, fourth industrial revolution language, especially fourth industrial revolution language. And that was the key to sparking this whole thing. Once we realized that there was an effort to design the future through designing technology, and you start unraveling that, you realize almost every kind of emerging technology, including a lot of stuff that most people don't think about or have never heard of, there are people in Davos type crowds, often literally in Davos, trying to come up with a way to design it so that it, right from the very start, has all the values, the Davos values, ESG, stakeholder capitalism, all that stuff embedded into it right from the very start.
Yeah. One thing that I think some people that aren't like super familiar with all of this and Klaus Schwab and World Economic Forum that they might not realize is that Klaus Schwab, along with being this James Bond villain looking guy that's head of the World Economic Forum, which has all of these, grandiose plans of changing the world and all of that with the Great Reset and ESG, stakeholder capitalism, all of these kind of things that you almost think like synonymous with, these ruling Davos elite types. He's also a amateur futurist. Like, this guy is super into what he calls, I think he coined the term, the fourth industrial revolution. He wrote a book by that exact title, talking about all the technology that's coming down the pike here and how it's, from everything from artificial intelligence to automation in factories to virtual reality to you name it, quantum computers, whatever, all robotics, all of this stuff is coming down the pipe and it's all going to be disruptive. And because it's going to be disruptive, like, basically we have to plan for it and we have to kind of model our plans around this disruptive technology in order to take care of all the stakeholders. That's basically his point in any time where he's talking about this or in his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. But the way that we were kind of looking at all of this, because, we were obviously neck deep in all this ESG stuff and how ESG was this way of controlling the economy and society by extension, using these arbitrary, subjective ESG metrics to punish or reward companies for following the agenda, that we realized that a lot of the same stuff that was coming out of the World Economic Forum in relation to this coming disruption when it came to the fourth industrial revolution technologies that were coming our way resembled the same action plan as ESG, just at a kind of a macro level, or even a more detailed, incisive level when it came to these technologies. And an analogy that we came up with a while back, I think before we even started, like contributing to this book, was like the internet. When the internet came on the scene, especially widespread in like the early 2000s, that the government really didn't have a handle on it. Like it was the Wild West. Basically anything went. And if you grew up on that internet, you know what I'm talking about. Yep. Everything was open game when it came to the internet. And it wasn't until much later that the government started to get their hands on it and trying to manipulate it in certain ways and shift it and limit it in certain ways and all of that. But by then, the internet was moving at such a fast speed that the government was trying to play catch up with it. And we think that now, what's happening now is a very similar level of disruption that was brought on by the internet. But if they could go back in time with the internet, they would have been doing what they're doing now with the fourth industrial revolution. They're going to try to set up the mechanisms of control before the internet gets turned on and everyone logs on from one side of the country to the other, one side of the world to the other. That's what they're trying to do now. They're trying to get the foundations built of control right now before these technologies become pervasive, or ubiquitous, I should say, throughout the land.
Yeah, that's exactly like that. That's the best way I think of explaining what this is really all about. If the left could go back in time, I think everybody on the right especially knows this to be true. And honest people on the left know this to be true as well. If the left could get into a time machine right now and go back, the leaders of the left could get into a time machine and go back in time to 1995 and have the ability to pass laws that determine what's allowed on the internet and what isn't, would they do it? And what would they do? And I think we all know they absolutely would do it, number one. And number two, they would build all kinds of restrictions on speech and all kinds of content restrictions and all kinds of government agencies and things, regulations, and, but they can't do it now. They want to, you could tell some of them want to, but they can't because people are used to the freedom and they don't want it. They don't want these government regulations. They don't want controls on free speech. They don't want these things. And so it's really, really, really hard for them to institute these changes. But if they had always existed right from the very beginning, people would have just accepted that this is the normal way the internet works. Yeah, of course you can't say whatever you want on social media. That's the way the internet works. In that same way, they're trying to design these new technologies like artificial intelligence and various computing systems and things like that. The metaverse, which is tied in with virtual reality and everything. And augmented reality is also related to that. Digital currencies like central bank digital currencies, all of these new emerging technologies are all being designed right from the start with ESG and other social credit scoring systems and left-wing ideology right from the very beginning. So that once the regular average person starts using AI, they're not going to have a version of AI that was a free, libertarian type version of it. The only one they'll know is the one that was designed by people like Klaus Schwab. Like that's the one they'll know. Right. And the same thing is true with virtually every kind of technology. And so what this book does is it goes into all the different emerging technologies, the kinds of disruption that's going to happen from that, the opportunity for control and manipulation that exists there. And then we use their own words, their own plans, their own documents. Massive amounts of research went into this, showing how artificial intelligence and quantum computing and digital currencies and all these new technologies, the metaverse and other systems that are not necessarily technology based, like property ownership and all this stuff, how all these things together are being designed right now, right as we speak, by the Davos crowd to be a particular way, so that in 20 years from now, or 10 years from now, or even 5 years from now, the world is going to look more like the one they want and not like the one that you know today. And you're going to wake up one day, because the way the average person is just going to keep becoming more and more dependent on these technologies. And as we become more dependent on technology, as more new technologies emerge, and we're going to wake up one day and we're not really going to be free anymore. Our world is going to be dependent on all this other stuff, and those technologies are going to be designed right from the start to have all this left-wing ideology built into the design, so that we're not even going to realize it's happening until we wake up and we're completely dependent on all of this stuff that is basically ESG, Davos Manifesto, Great Reset type ideology.
Yeah, when we were began working on the Great Reset book, and even up through its completion and promotion of it and all of that, we talked about how, and just like a little bit behind, like, how the sausage is made type of things, like the actual like title of the book is probably like the last thing that was ever written, right? So when we finally came up with the title of this, which is Joe Biden and the Rise of 21st Century Fascism, I think actually Glenn came up with that. But it was basically around this idea that back in the old days, you needed a heavy hand of the government, authoritarian type rule. You needed stormtroopers to enforce your agenda. Because if somebody was doing something that was counter to your agenda, that had to be shut down, and it had to be shut down with force. And the elegant ideas, and elegant enforcement mechanisms that were in place now because of ESG and the way that people could be punished, or corporations could be punished, or their lifeline of financing could just be cut off if they're not following the agenda, didn't need the stormtroopers, didn't need the authoritarian force in place. It just needed basically everyone to play ball. And the more people that played ball, the easier it was to get your agenda across. That's why we called it 21st century fascism. It was a new version of it. And this takes that same idea to an incredible degree. Because in the same way that the economy and society is being now managed because of these ESG type things that are in practice now today, this takes it even further. So the level of control that they'll have over us when these things start getting put into practice, and like I said, these technologies start becoming ubiquitous across the land and all of that are embedded with these values, from ESG to just like the Davos Manifesto type stuff, you will be controlled, and you might not even realize that you are giving up your free will, because it'll be so elegant and built into the cake that you won't even know what's happening. Yeah. And like, one small example of that, I don't even think this is covered in the book because it's such old news, is the idea of social media, and how social media would put their thumbs on the scales when it came to the messaging that got across that was allowed. Conservative speech was shadow banned while liberal speech was promoted, that type of stuff. But now just imagine that type of thing when it comes to social media and the speech that goes along with it, applied to everything. So one of my favorite chapters in this book, and I won't be too spoiler here, Justin, so don't worry too much, but one of my favorite chapters in the book is based off of that one now infamous article that was originally hosted on the World Economic Forum website. In the year is 2030, and you will own nothing and have no privacy, and you'll never be happier, or something like that. And it basically is around this idea that in the future, because of technology and because of peer-to-peer, whatever, whether it's Uber or Airbnb or all of these different things, in the future, you won't own anything. Everything will be a service. And because everything is a service, not owning DVDs, you have Netflix. Not owning a car, you have Uber or something like that. Everyone will be happy because you'll just have a service. But with that comes control. In the same way that Twitter and Facebook were able to kind of control the speech that was going on, when there are people, these giant corporations that are all following this ESG model and all go to Davos every, summer or whatever to go skiing in the Alps, if they're all abiding by these ESG things, then who's to say they won't cut you off from being able to use their services because you're not following the agenda? So the level of control is incredible. And some of the stuff that like we all get into in this book is, I can't even understate it. I can't overstate it. It's just mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think that I think that there might be people who are watching this, or they might, find out about the book from a friend or something, and they say to themselves, well, I'm not really into technology, or I don't think that I'm going to personally use a lot of technology, or I'm not very dependent on it. And it's like, what you have to understand is that I'm not super into technology necessarily either. Like, I'm not one of these guys that loves, reading stories about artificial intelligence and is following all this stuff very closely. That was not my thing. Glenn is like that. Donald is kind of like that. But I'm definitely was not that way. But what you realize when you start looking into this is that the world is going to move in this direction, whether you're interested in it or not. And it's not just you personally. It's not just you engaging with this technology directly. It's the way the technology in every system that exists around you is every system that exists around you is going to become more and more dependent on this. So, for example, one of the things that I think we do talk about in the book a little bit is how artificial intelligence is being used by all kinds of different systems to make decisions. This is already starting to happen. So, for example, when you go to get a loan from a bank, a lot of banks now use various kinds of artificial intelligence to help them make decisions about whether people should get a loan or not get a loan. That's expanding dramatically and is likely to continue to expand dramatically in the coming years, to the point where eventually a lot of analysts believe there won't be any loan officers anymore. There'll be, or very, very few of them. There'll be no people, in other words, making decisions about who gets loans and who doesn't. There'll be an algorithm. There'll be AI. There'll be artificial intelligence will decide who gets loans and who doesn't get loans. And based on what? Based on how the artificial, at least at first, how the artificial intelligence is designed by the people who make it. So if they decide, if the people designing the artificial intelligence systems that will determine who gets loans decide that, they're going to build certain racial equity quotas into the system, they're going to bake that into the AI decision-making process, or they're going to bake in gender equity, or they're going to bake in, LGBTQ
carbon footprint.
Yeah, or carbon footprint, or whatever it is, or Asians have too many homes, so we're gonna, not worry about Asians getting home loans anymore. We need to focus on Hispanics instead, or whatever it is. It could be anything. That's the point. It doesn't have to be any particular hot button issue right now. It could be anything. The point is the AI makes the decision based on these factors that are being built into it right from the very start. And all of that stuff is already happening. We are already seeing artificial intelligence and algorithms designed from the start to have these kinds of quotas and things put into consideration when they're making when they're producing decisions for these financial institutions. So you might go to get a loan from a bank. You apply online, which is now how a lot of people are applying for loans. You apply online and you get a decision back, and it will be yes or no, or a certain amount, or an interest rate, or whatever it is, right? If you're approved, it'll be varying interest, whatever the interest rate is that they give you. And you might assume this is just based on financial considerations. But in reality, the artificial intelligence making the decision has been designed to base it on all kinds of things that have nothing to do with your financial, with financial considerations. Now, maybe a lot of it does, and then just there are other things that don't have anything to do with it, but you won't know. You won't have any idea how it's making those choices. And then as AI gets more and more complex, we really won't know how these decisions are being made. You're just going to receive the decision, and then that's going to be it. And it's not just for loans and financial, it's all across the economy, all across society, where you're starting to see this technology emerge, all the way to the point, and we won't get into detail on this, but this is also discussed, I believe, this is in the book as well, sentencing decisions for people. Like,
Sure.
if you're being sentenced to a crime, for committing a crime, there's a sentencing decision after the fact. What should your punishment be? And we're already seeing countries use artificial intelligence to help them figure out what your punishment should be, all the way to the point where in some places, you're having AI systems just spit out an answer. Oh, here's the answer. Here's how long they should go to jail. And you have courts taking this into consideration.
Right.
So literally AI is deciding how long people should be in prison or how much their fine should be or other things based on algorithms that are being designed. That's the world that's being built right now. And that's not even the scary stuff. That's just that's like surface level. It gets really, really, really creepy as you go further down the rabbit hole. But that's the kind of thing that we're talking about.
Yeah, an issue that I've seen numerous times with books that come out, even books by like famous people that, you would recognize, book comes out or something and you read it and it's like, oh yeah, this is great. I kind of heard all of this stuff before, like the process of actually like editing a book and having it printed and then getting it out on shelves is like several months long, right? So sometimes like a book will come out and it'll be like, yeah, this is great. It's like talking about what happened during COVID and lockdowns, but like I already know most of this stuff. It's nice to have it all in one spot, but it's kind of outdated already. I can guarantee you, folks, this thing will not be outdated for a while, because not only is it talking about the stuff that's happening right now or the stuff that's going to be happening in the potentially a few short years, but it's talking about the longer range potentiality of all of this stuff. So this is something that, like, man, if you want to kind of know where the conversation is going in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, this is your atlas. This is the map that you need to kind of understand where the national conversation is going to start going when these things start getting a little bit more popular and increasing and all of that different stuff. So if you haven't ordered a copy of this book yet, you are doing yourself a disservice, because you're going to be left behind talking about old stories and old tired whatever stupid stuff AOC is coming up with this week. And what you're going to be left behind is the real conversation that's going to have a substantial impact on the livelihoods of you and I, the economy in general, and society as a whole.
Yeah. And to give you a sort of a sense of the kinds of things that are being, I'm not even, what I'm about to say is not even, well, theoretically, here's what people could be using this for. Like these are actual specific examples of the kinds of discussions that are already happening. And you can find all of this. You just have to dig into it and look for it yourself. But in the book, we lay all this stuff out. Okay. The kinds of things that are being discussed for how this technology should be utilized in the future and what kinds of decisions it should make and why it should be making these decisions. It is incredible what people are doing right now. For example, this is, I think, in maybe the first couple of chapters of the book or something. We talk about how there is a discussion about whether artificial intelligence amongst the experts, okay, world leading experts, about whether artificial intelligence should be used to determine when nuclear missiles should be launched. And that we should actually, it would be better if AI had control over nuclear missiles, because it has a better sense. It's not it doesn't have necessarily an itchy trigger finger. It doesn't have human emotion. It can think rationally and all of this stuff. And maybe it should be in charge of nuclear weapons. This is a real thing that is being discussed as an actual idea that we should be in consideration of. How should we, another thing is bioengineering, biohacking, stuff like that. how should we design biologically people in the future? Should we have designer babies? What should be the limitations and the rules for those people? What about the connection between human beings and machines? And should these two things merge in the future? And what would that look like? And how can we make sure that in a world where we're designing babies and we're having people merge with technologies, that there's equity and inclusivity and fairness, and we're not leaving any particular racial group behind? And maybe we need government programs that ensure that racially certain groups get access to this designer baby technology more so than other racial groups, so that we have more equity. Like, these are real conversations that elites are having right now.
Yeah. Like,
I mean, it's astounding.
when the elements of the book consisting of self-driving cars and automation and digital currencies and all of that, and that's the most modest stuff in the book, that this is some cutting edge stuff in here. So
the basic stuff is hundreds of millions of people losing their jobs from automation.
Yeah,
that's the early on stuff. Yeah, that's the early on stuff, is how hundreds of millions of people are going to lose their jobs. And from there, it just gets crazier and crazier and crazier.
Yeah, we could probably talk about this for another hour and still not being able to oversell this book. So, we have probably done it 10% justice just in this half-hour long discussion. Justin, maybe we'll do a series of videos, especially in the weeks following its release, kind of talking about some certain aspects of it, having kind of a little bit more open dialogue about some of these things once the book is in people's hands and they're actually kind of reading this stuff.
Yep.
But beyond that, this promise for some future videos. Is there anything else that you want to mention before we kind of wrap it up?
No, I mean, I think the main thing that I want to get across to people is that, we posted an ad for the book on social media. I just put an ad together where I just threw, the book cover up there, and I said, check this book out. It's going to be incredible. We're recording this video the week before the book comes out. The book comes out on July 11th. A lot of people who see this video will probably see it after the book comes out. But I put this ad out, and somebody posted a comment on social media saying something like, these books by these, people like Glenn Beck and, Fox News writers like Justin Haskins, like these kinds of people, like they're just extended magazine articles. That's what they wrote. Yeah. And they don't ever really provide you with anything real. It's all just crap. They just take one little interesting thing and they expand it into a whole book so that you stupid people buy it. And don't be a lemming that buys books like that, is basically what this person is saying. And I could not possibly I wish I could tell you in a comprehensive way how incredibly wrong that is.
What's so funny?
Is the furthest thing from that. It really is.
What's so funny about that is I saw that comment and I was going to tell you about it because you and I have made fun of other books out there like that come out and I really don't mean to point out anyone specifically. So seriously, I apologize if I'm actually mentioning your book title, but they'll come out with these books and be like, America the Beautiful. And then it's just talking about all these kind of frivolous things that we've all heard a million times before, but you packaged it up, put someone noteworthy on the front cover of it, and then you sold it. Justin, you and I have made fun of stuff like that
all the time.
This is not even close to that. This was literally multiple books worth of content all crammed into one thing because it's just so much important stuff in here. There's 1,200 footnotes in here. It's an unbelievable undertaking what this book is, and it's so incredibly important that people check it out.
And it ties in all kinds of things that just it explains why the world is evolving and changing the way that it is, why corporations are becoming woke, why your world is changing around you, why you see the things you see when you log on to your computer, all the way up to how like I said, the definition of humanity is evolving and changing, and why that's happening the way it is. And we even spend a whole chapter. There is a gigantic chapter of this book that talks about how all of this is actually related to the war in Ukraine and Russia, and
that could have been its own book. That could have been its own book,
without a doubt. I mean, there is so much in this book. You would be shocked. I mean, if you actually take the time to read this book, you will see it is shocking how much people in Russia and in the East in general are talking about these very concepts, and how they hate the West in large part because of the kinds of things that Klaus Schwab and people like that are doing, and how they use it as propaganda all the time in their own crazy authoritarian worlds to show how the West is losing its mind. It's amazing.
So one other thing is, we worked with Glenn Beck on this book too. Our Arguing with Socialists. This came out in like 2019 or something like that, or no, that came out in 2020.
2020. Yeah, 2020, early 2020.
And it's like, this is my favorite book on socialism of all time. Like, I adore this book, but like, to say that there's not other books that are like it, would be, not true. Like, there are other books that talk about socialism and all this. I don't think any of them are nearly as entertaining or informative as this one, but there are other books that are like it. The Great Reset, I mean, we led the charge on this. We beat out every other book that had Great Reset in the title by probably 8 to 10 months or something like that. So there wasn't any book like this when it came out, but there was a couple in the aftermath.
And now, and the thrust of that book was primarily teaching people about ESG and social credit scoring and the financial institutions and corporations. And lots of people have talked about that now ad nauseum. I mean, we now know the conservative movement understands that, and that's not a novel concept anymore.
This book, though, Dark Future, there's nothing like it. I swear to you, there is nothing like this book out there. So that's it. That's our long infomercial for this book. Justin, if there's any last things you want to get off your chest before we wrap it up, now's your opportunity.
No, I buy the. I'm telling you, buy the book, borrow it from a friend, go to the library and get it if the library has it. Find a way to read the book.
The audiobook is read by Glenn Beck himself, so he throws in some little ad libs here and there too. So that
it does not follow the text perfectly. That's on purpose. He's now promoting it that way. Like, if you want to hear like extra bonus commentary, get the audio version.
Yeah, so I will definitely be getting the audiobook.
And I'm so excited for the audio. It really is great. Try to get a hard copy of the book. Sure. Glenn's been saying this, and I think this is true. You actually, more than anybody, because you spent a lot of time on the chapter working with Glenn on the chapter about property ownership. Buy physical things. Yes. Don't rely wholly on digital stuff, because that can be deleted and changed and removed from stores. And you think you own your Kindle copy of the book or something? You don't. That can be just removed from your library tomorrow. Exactly. So get the physical copy of the book if you can.
Yes, great point. Fantastic point. Way to tie it all in. There's some meta messaging right there. But all right, everyone, thank you for tuning in to this little episode of Justin and Donald Save America. Book comes out July 11th. Make sure you got a copy in hand or pre-ordered. I've got mine. It's going to be delivered that next day, so I'm super excited for that. Definitely get the audiobook as well. Justin, I forget what our outros are in this. You got anything to say?
We're gonna find people find you. Make sure you follow and subscribe.
Yeah, there you go. Hit the subscribe button, share this content, hit the like button, leave a comment under this video. All those things help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. Justin, where can the find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook, Twitter, Getter, all those things, and at justinhaskins.com.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.